Welcome to this edition of Market Mantra, in which we give you a complete update on the economic, business and stock market news of the day. I'm Arjun Chaudhary and with me is my co-anchor in Hindi, Nikhil Shukla.
नमस्कार। मार्केट मंत्र में आप सभी सुनने वालों का स्वागत है। प्रतिदिन की तरह आज भी हम देश और दुनिया से आर्थिक, व्यापारिक तथा शेयर बाजार के समाचार आप तक लेकर आए हैं और हम उन पर चर्चा भी करेंगे। और सबसे पहले हेडलाइंस के साथ में है अर्जुन जी।
Domestic equity and currency markets remain closed today on account of the Dussehra holiday. India emerges as the world's largest producer and second largest exporter of sugar. And in the global market, stocks in Asia and the US rise in hope of a less aggressive rate hikes in the future.
घरेलू शेयर बाजार और मुद्रा बाजार आज दशहरा पर्व के उपलक्ष्य में बंद रहे। भारत दुनिया में चीनी का सबसे बड़ा उत्पादक और दूसरा सबसे बड़ा निर्यातक बना। और वैश्विक कारोबार में एशियाई तथा अमेरिकी बाजारों में भविष्य में ब्याज दरों में कम वृद्धि की संभावना के कारण बढ़त का रुख।
In our top story, domestic equity and currency markets were closed today on account of the national holiday of Dussehra. On Tuesday, domestic equity markets rose over 2% on the back of positive global cues. Sensex at the Bombay Stock Exchange gained by 1,276 points or 2.3% to close at 58,065. While Nifty at the National Stock Exchange surged by 386 points or 2.3% to close at 17,274. At the interbank foreign exchange market, the rupee strengthened by 36 paise to close at 81 rupees and 52 paise against the US dollar yesterday. And on this, we are joined by our expert, Sharad Kohli. Sharad, a warm welcome to you on Market Mantra.
Thank you so much, Arjun. Thank you so much, Nikhil, and greetings to all the listeners.
So, Sharad, on Money Matters, we were discussing about the market performance yesterday. The markets are going up by 1,276 points or 2.3% yesterday. How do you see the markets performing tomorrow? Because we've seen a lot of choppy trade, markets going up on one session and then going down in the next session. There is either short covering or profit booking. What do you think will happen tomorrow?
Well, we have observed two kinds of trends, Arjun, in the market. And those two trends, or I would say the market has assumed two kinds of forms now. One form is where we see decoupling. When I say decoupling, I mean it does not follow the, the global cues, the cues of the American markets, cues of the European markets, and sometimes the cues of the rest of the Asian markets as well. That's one form of market. And the second form of market is what we have been witnessing for so many years. That is when the SGX Nifty, it opens in the morning in Singapore. The Indian, obviously, they take the cues from the American markets and then the market. So we are seeing a mix of these two forms of markets at this point of time. But what we saw yesterday, of course, today was a holiday, was clearly the market picked up cues from the American markets. There was a very sharp upsurge in the American stocks. And today, since we are closed, yesterday evening again, we saw Dow going up by more than 800 points. So to answer your question very precisely, tomorrow there might be a big gap up. We call it as a gap up because the market catches up for the cues and then it opens high. But personally speaking, I'm not a big fan of the gap up, big gap ups or big gap downs, because the market then tends to get closer to the reality of that particular day. Having said that, Arjun, a very important comment here is that market right now is going through very high volatility. And as I said, there is a tug of war. I've been saying that for a few weeks now. There's a tug of war going on. There are certain factors, the investments from the FPIs, FIIs, and many a time the DIIs and the big retail investor group, which we have now. It's huge. We've got 10 crore Demat account holders in India. And of course, a lot of them trade on a daily basis or whatever, So we are observing that there are these set of people who want to put money in the market, who want to buy at dips. But then there is the other set of factors which are more prevalent and which seem to be stronger at this point of time, which is the global data points and the global geopolitical situation, which tend to pull the market down. So this tug of war is, causing high volatility in the market. I mean, 1,000 point in Sensex, 2,000 point in Nifty has become the new normal. I mean, these were the kind of, changes in the market levels which we used to witness on very rare occasions. And now for the last few months, this has become so normal. We see sharp upsurges. We see sharp downswings. So I think the geopolitical factors, I'm a little more worried. If you ask me, economic data points, of course, most of the market analysts, most of the market pairs, most of the investors, they pretty much know that, we are going through very high inflation, we're going through interest rate hikes, we are going through exodus of funds on and off by FPIs, and sometimes they come back as well. And of course, the IMF and large rating agencies have forecast 98% of the experts around the world, 91% of the CEOs around the world have now predicted that we are almost confirmed that the recession is going to set in by the end of this year or throughout 2023. So, these two factors are driving the market, but I am more worried, as I said, about the geopolitical factors, because that is one thing which can cause a very sharp movement in markets. And if you see the situation on the Russia-Ukraine front, especially after Russia's annexing of those 4 regions on the eastern side of Ukraine, I think that has upset the world community, and that is causing a lot of stress in the geopolitical situation. Then, of course, we saw North Korea and we saw a missile flying over Japan. So I think that caused a lot of tension on the eastern hemisphere. So I think the geopolitical factors are weighing in quite heavily, and everyone who's trading in the market, everyone who's investing in the market, I'm sure this is weighing in on their minds. I mean, if it is not weighing, then I think you should be concerned about that. So the word of advice here is that, the investors should not make any short-term commitment at this point of time. I found, Arjun, a very interesting fact came out, which I would like to state today, that people came as investors. When the COVID happened in 2.5 years, we saw lockdowns, and these were the only markets which were open, by the way. We saw all the other markets closing down, taking turns. A lot of people moved into the market, and they came as investors, that, okay, we'll start investing in stock markets. But then they became traders. So I think the short-term traders should be very careful, because you can see very sharp volatility, and you might get stressed that what is happening to my portfolio, what is going to happen to my money. Is it going to be safe? Is this going to erode, or is it going to double, or whatever, So I think the best strategy at this point of time, Arjun, is the word of advice for all the people who are connected with stock markets is that you should think long term. And if you buy on dips by way of a systematic investment plan, I think those people will make the most out of these difficult situations that market is going through. As for the recent upsurge, Arjun, which we saw, yesterday, and in all probability, we'll saw in the beginning of the day tomorrow as well. The market is, as I said, is going to be a big gap up tomorrow. But then I think what needs to be kept in mind is that the sustainability of this particular upsurge is questionable at this point of time, because, as I said, there are a lot of factors which want to drag the market down. So how long-lived is this upsurge is a big question mark. So therefore, my feeling is that, again, we might, go into that mindset of the investors and traders, and then the market movement, where, it will start counting upon the geopolitical factors which I mentioned, start counting on the economic data points, and it may again start moving down. So it is going to remain volatile, Arjun, to answer your question very, very precisely.
शरद, अगर हम घरेलू शेयर बाजार पर नजर डालते हैं तो हम ये देखते हैं कि एक दिन ऐसा होता है कि जब हमारा सेंसेक्स और निफ्टी बहुत ही ज्यादा ऊंचाई पर चढ़ जाते हैं, 1000 पॉइंट्स भी कोई मायने नहीं रखता। वहीं दूसरी ओर हम ये देखते हैं कि अगले दिन या उसके दूसरे तीसरे दिन बहुत ही तेजी से धड़ाम से ये गिर भी जाता है। इसके पीछे आप FIS को कितना मानते हैं कि कारण हो सकता है?
निखिल, बिल्कुल यही बात मैं अभी अर्जुन से और श्रोताओं से अंग्रेजी में कर रहा था कि मार्केट का मूवमेंट इतना शार्प हो गया है। जब मैं उनको यही बता रहा था कि 200 पॉइंट निफ्टी, 1000 पॉइंट सेंसेक्स या 300 पॉइंट निफ्टी और 1200 पॉइंट सेंसेक्स बहुत रेयर माना जाता था कि इतना तेज मूवमेंट मार्केट में तो कभी कभार देखने को मिलता था। वो डेटें याद रहती थी एक जमाने में जब इतना मूवमेंट होता था। अब तो ये नया नॉर्मल बन गया है। तो मुझे लग रहा है कि FIIs का रोल बहुत रहता है, इसमें कोई दो राय नहीं है निखिल, के वो लोग जो पैसा लगाते हैं और जब निकालते हैं तो एकदम से उनकी ये भी होता है, मैं आपको अगर टेक्निकली इसको समझाऊं, क्योंकि वो लोग लार्ज क्वांटिटीज खरीदते और बेचते हैं। वो रिटेल निवेशकों की तरह 1000 शेयर या 100 शेयर या 500 शेयर ऐसे नहीं बेचते हैं। उनके शेयर हजारों में और कई दफे लाखों में भी खरीदे बेचे जाते हैं, ब्लॉक डील्स जिसको हम बोलते हैं। तो जब ब्लॉक डील्स होती है तो मार्केट एकदम शार्प रिएक्ट करता है। तो उसको देख के निखिल क्या होता है कि जो रिटेल निवेशक हैं वो भी घबरा के अपना बेचने या खरीदना, और जब चढ़ रही होती है तो वो खरीदना शुरू कर देते हैं, बिक रहा होता है तो बिकना शुरू। तो इसमें एक मल्टीप्लायर इफेक्ट आता है, जहां एक तरफ FPIs और FIIs जब बेचना और खरीदना शुरू करते हैं तो उसको देखा देखी और उससे डर कर या उससे उत्साहित होकर रिटेल इन्वेस्टर्स भी आ जाते हैं। तो बिल्कुल उनकी मूवमेंट से बहुत फर्क पड़ता है, क्योंकि वो बड़ा पैसा होता है। हम 3,000 4,000 करोड़ की बात कर रहे हैं, हम करीब 1,500 2,000 करोड़ की बात करते हैं, कभी कभी तो हमने $1 बिलियन का प्रतिदिन भी एक्सोडस और इन्वेस्टमेंट देखा हुआ है। तो बड़ा पैसा नेचुरल बात है निखिल कि वो मार्केट को सिग्निफिकेंटली मूव करता है, ऊपर नीचे जाता है, पर वो सेंटिमेंट को मुझे लगता है कि ज्यादा इफेक्ट करता है। और इस समय आप मुझसे सच पूछे तो मैं आपको ये बताना चाहूंगा कि इस समय जो खासकर जो ट्रेडर कम्युनिटी है वो बहुत कंफ्यूज्ड है। और आपको एक बात और मैं राज की बात बताऊं कि ट्रेडर्स जो होते हैं वो क्या करते हैं, वो तो 10 बजे खरीदा, 11 बजे बेच दिया, फिर 12 बजे खरीद लिया, 1 बजे फिर बेच दिया, या अगले दिन सुबह बेच दिया, या 2 दिन बाद बेच दिया। इस समय वो लोग बहुत अच्छा पैसा नहीं बना पा रहे हैं, क्योंकि मार्केट कोई एक सेट जब उनको लगता है कि ऊपर जाने लगती है, जैसा कि आपने कहा, फिर नीचे आ जाती है, फिर नीचे आता। आप देखिए, हम ये 15,200 हम सबसे नीचे गए थे। मैं निफ्टी की बात कर रहा हूं। हम लोग निफ्टी को थोड़ा सा ज्यादा स्टडी करते हैं सेंसेक्स से, क्योंकि निफ्टी खुद भी ट्रेड की जाती है, उसके अगेंस्ट फ्यूचर ट्रेडिंग भी होती है, पुट और कॉल ऑप्शंस भी होती है, और निफ्टी में 50 शेयर है जबकि सेंसेक्स में 30 है। इसलिए मैं थोड़ा निफ्टी का जिक्र ज्यादा करता हूं सेंसेक्स के मुकाबले। 15,200 से हमने देखा 18,104 तक गई, उसके बाद 18,104 से घट के फिर ये 16,000 के आसपास आ गई, अब ये 17,000 के आसपास आ गई। तो ट्रेडर्स जो है वो बहुत कंफ्यूज है, उनको समझ नहीं आ रहा कि इस समय क्या किया जाए, क्या नीति अपनाई जाए। पर इन्वेस्टर जो है निखिल, ये बहुत जरूरी बात है। और मैं मानता हूं कि ज्यादातर श्रोता हमारे निवेशक हैं और बहुत ही प्रैग्मेटिक और प्रूडेंट, बहुत समझदार निवेशक हैं। तो उनको जब जब डिप्स आए निखिल, उन लोगों को थोड़ा थोड़ा करके, जब जब गिरती है, और गिरने के तो बहुत मौके मिल रहे हैं। कोई हमसे पूछता था पहले कि साहब मार्केट तो गिरेगी कब, ये तो ऊपर ही ऊपर जाती जा रही है। अब उसको ये शिकायत नहीं रहनी चाहिए, क्योंकि मार्केट बहुत मौके दे रही है आपको, बार बार गिरती है। तो थोड़ा थोड़ा करके, वीकली बेसिस पे, फोर्टनाइटली बेसिस पे, मंथली बेसिस पे, 1.5 महीने 2 महीने के गैप पे आप पैसे को थोड़ा थोड़ा करके लगाते रहे। आप देखेंगे कि जब आप 3 से 5 साल का नजरिया रख के चलेंगे, बल्कि 3 से 5 साल भी मैं ज्यादा बोल रहा हूं, अगर आप 2 साल में भी देखेंगे, क्योंकि हमने देखा जब भी बियर रन आया निखिल मार्केट में, तो वो बहुत दिन तक नहीं टिका। उसके बाद हमने देखा कि जब कोविड आया था, एकदम से मार्केट गिरी थी। उससे पहले 2008 में जब रिसेशन आया था लीमैन ब्रदर्स का, मार्केट एकदम गिरी थी, पर वो ज्यादा दिन तक सस्टेन नहीं कर पाया। तो ऐसा नहीं है, होता क्या है मार्केट में निखिल, बड़ी एक रोचक बात मैं बताऊं कि जिस दिन मार्केट नीचे जाती है उस दिन ऐसा लगता है सब कुछ बुरा हो गया, बस सब कुछ लुट गया और सब खराब होगा। और जिस दिन मार्केट ऊपर जाने लगती है, ऑल ऑफ ए सडन वही थिंकिंग, उन्हीं लोगों की थिंकिंग पॉजिटिव हो जाती है। तो इसलिए आपको निखिल मार्केट में वॉलेटिलिटी इतनी ज्यादा दिखाई दे रही है।
जी Sharad, you're mentioning the volatility index, also known as a fear gauge. It's at 19.57. It was oscillating between 19 and 22 in trade yesterday. You also mentioned about the US market and its strong linkage to the markets in India. So we're talking about hedge funds. Clearly, they have been trying to short the market. Our DIIs have been looking to cover. But what we saw in trade yesterday was that both the FIIs and DIIs were both net buyers in the market. So if there's going to be a surge like what we saw yesterday, clearly both the types of buyers will have to buy simultaneously or become net buyers. Do you see that happening? Or is one looking to cover and others looking to book profits? How is that working?
Well, Arjun, I would like to inform, this is something which comes out of your question. A very interesting fact which very few people know, that the FPIs and the FIIs, they don't just buy cash-based stocks, which means they don't just buy for investment. You'll be surprised to know that a lot of FIIs and FPIs also do speculative investment. In fact, we, at the end of the day, when we close the market after 3:30, what we do is we also try and gather the data that how much of FPI, FII money went into put and call options, how much of it went into futures, basically how much went into the derivatives market. So I think FPIs and FIIs also have various category of players in it. So I think when the market opens tomorrow and there is a big gap up, I'm sure in a big gap up, any pragmatic and prudent trader or investor doesn't like to step in, because there is more chance of its correction and coming down from there. Very rarely it happens that there's a big gap up and the market still continues to climb, like what we saw yesterday. Those days are rare. Mostly, I'm not personally a big fan of big gap ups and big gap downs, because most of the time these big gap ups and big gap downs do not hold. So therefore, FIIs and FPIs, I think they will wait for the corrective move to come. And then sometimes, market, you see there's a big gap up, then it comes down after an hour or two, and then finally it goes back to the level it opened. So that is an indicator of the fact that they invested money, the money came in later 12. And we should also not forget, Arjun, another very interesting fact which people should note, that most of the FPIs, you will find the funds come around after 12 p.m. because if they are coming from the Western world, when it opens, when it's about 7:30, 8 a.m. in the morning over there, that's when they open their offices and they start the business activity. So early morning, most of the times, I would say, we do not find FII and FPI money coming in or going out. I think so. I think the time difference also plays a role in the market. But sometimes, of course, they give overnight orders. If you give an overnight order, then in the morning itself, you will see money moving in or money moving out. But normally around the afternoon, you see this activity happening. So let's see. I think if there's a big gap up, you may not see a big FPI, FII activity immediately. But if the market finally comes down and they still are ready to, load some money in the market, you might see a movement coming later. So all this is indicative of high volatility, which we are going to witness in the not just next few days, Arjun. This volatility is going to continue for the next few weeks is one thing that I'm very, very certain about.
So clearly there's a linkage between the cash market and the derivative market, the options market, especially options contracts that are in the money. So you have traders, day traders, in fact, looking to buy in or buy out of their position and then go immediately to the cash market. So this kind of spread that they have for a stock or the index has been causing the volatility. That's at least what we have been able to understand from your commentary on this. So do you advise the investor either to go for a mutual fund or to just stay invested in stock or a portfolio of stocks whose fundamentals are strong? Because a lot of this is all technical movements of stock prices.
To a certain extent, yes, Arjun, what you said in the first part of what you spoke just now, that there is hedging, we call it as arbitrage, and what people do is they create a position, a buy position in the put and in the derivatives market, and then they cancel it out by way of a cash position or vice versa. Yes, a lot of people do that hedging strategy, and that's a very, very protective strategy because you don't tend to lose a lot of money because your position is actually squared up by backing of the shares which you've gone into derivative, because derivative has got a certain lot, and an equivalent lot or more lot you tend to square up in the other side. But yes, as far as the investors are concerned, I think if you're in mutual funds and if your NAVs are not doing that hunky-dory, you find your NAVs are not doing that great, I think it's better to wait for some time. As for the investors who directly have taken a plunge into the market, if they are in profits, I would suggest they should book and come out, even if your profits are lesser at this point of time. If you're in losses and if your losses are minimal, I would say you can still afford to come out of if you're at a break-even point, it's better to exit. But if you're in severe losses, I would suggest you should wait because this market is going to recover. It may take a while. So long as this high volatility is there, I think you need not look at the market,
right.
3 times a day. I find people opening, their phones and checking out the market every now and then. I don't think an investor should be doing that. You can probably look at your rates once a week or something, or just keep a basic eye on the market. As for the mutual funds, yes, I think the SIP in mutual fund, Arjun, still continues to pour in. And I think that is the safest way to play the market. You've got experts who are handling, professionals who are handling at AMCs. They look after your funds. But then we should not forget that equity mutual funds are also subject to market risk. I mean, you cannot blame the AMC if market takes a very sharp correction. But yes, one thing which is very interesting and very significant, which you said, is that choice of stocks has to be very, very particular. I mean, you need to see the fundamentals of the stock because eventually, as you rightly said, in the long run, the stock will stabilize around its fundamentals. Short-term movements, as you rightly said, are technical. It could be oversold, it could be overbought. You could have a 20-day MA, you could have a 50-day MA, you could have a 200-day MA, you could have a 52-week moving average and so and so. So I think those movements do impact in short-term, but long-term, investors should look at more at fundamentals and buy attractive book values, buy attractive PE ratios, look at the company's profits, look at company's past performance. I think in this scenario, staying invested in blue chips, I would say, Arjun, would be a better strategy than having a mix of, small cap or mid cap, because blue chips are little more immune to such sharp movements, I would say. Yeah.
जी, अब एशियाई बाजारों पर नजर डालें तो आज एशियाई बाजारों में उछाल देखा गया। निवेशकों में ब्याज दरों में कम बढ़ोतरी की उम्मीदों के बीच ऐसा रुझान देखने को मिल रहा है। हांगकांग का हेंग सेंग आज 6% ऊपर आ गया और जापान का निक्केई आधा प्रतिशत लाभ में रहा। दक्षिण कोरिया के कॉस्टी में 0.3% की वृद्धि हुई। सिंगापुर का स्ट्रेट्स टाइम्स सूचकांक 0.5% के फायदे के साथ बंद हुआ। चीन का शंघाई कंपोजिट सूचकांक आज अवकाश के कारण बंद रहा। अंतर्दिवसीय कारोबार में यूरोपीय शेयर बाजारों में भी गिरावट का रुख था। जर्मनी का डेक्स 0.9%, लंदन का FTSE 100 1% और फ्रांस का कैक 0.7% के नुकसान के साथ कारोबार कर रहे थे। शरद, इन पर छोटी सी टिप्पणी आपकी।
मुझे लगता है कि देखिए, यूरोपियन मार्केट्स, एशियन मार्केट्स भी ज्यादातर क्लूज लेते हैं अमेरिकन मार्केट से। हमारी तरह बहुत दफे, अब अच्छी बात यह है कि हम अब कम वहां से क्यूज लेते हैं। वो लोग तो हमेशा ही डिपेंडेंट रहते हैं। और इसमें एक चीन की मार्केट देखने वाली कि चीन की मार्केट कई दफे अपनी चाल चलती है और इसी वजह से हांगकांग की मार्केट कई दफे जो बाकी ग्लोबल ट्रेंड होता है उसको फॉलो नहीं करती, क्योंकि चीन की इकोनॉमी बहुत अच्छी नहीं है, वहां पूरी हमें ट्रांसपेरेंसी देखने को नहीं मिलती है। तो इसलिए हम चाइना की मार्केट की उतनी बात नहीं करते जितनी हम जापान की करते हैं, जितनी हम सिंगापुर की करते हैं, जितनी हम कॉस्टी कोरिया की करते हैं, उतनी बात नहीं करते। जी हाँ, वो भी अमेरिकन मार्केट्स की तरह ही एक ट्रेंड लेके चल रहे हैं। और मुझे लगता है एक बात मैं यहाँ पर, क्योंकि ये कार्यक्रम हमारा अर्थशास्त्र पर, मार्केट पर, स्टॉक्स बिजनेस पे है, एक बहुत अच्छी बात मैं बताना चाहूंगा जो कि मुझे लग रहा है हमारे श्रोताओं को सुन के प्रसन्नता होगी। तो बहुत सारे लोग ये पूछ रहे हैं कि ऐसा कैसे है कि भारतीय अर्थव्यवस्था या भारतीय शेयर मार्केट उतना ज्यादा नहीं गिरे हैं जितना डाउ जोन्स में ऑलमोस्ट बेरिश फेस में 20% से ऊपर जब कोई मार्केट करेक्शन हो जाता है तो उसको हम बेरिश फेस ऑफिशियली मान लेते हैं। पर भारतीय मार्केट में आपको उतना शार्प मूवमेंट नहीं दिखा है। यही हाल भारतीय अर्थव्यवस्था का है। बाकी की दुनिया की अर्थव्यवस्थाओं से बहुत अच्छे हैं। और इसका मुख्य कारण जो मैं मेन बात बताना चाह रहा था वो ये कि जब कोविड आया तो अमेरिका और यूरोप जैसे देशों ने बेतहाशा करेंसी को छापा और करेंसी को छाप के लोगों के बैंक अकाउंट में सीधे सीधे पैसे 1500 $2,000 डाले। मेरी उन लोगों से बात हुई जिन लोगों को पैसा मिला, उन्होंने मुझे बताया कि अब तो हमको नौकरी, किसी ने तो ये कहा हमको नौकरी करने की जरूरत नहीं है। आज उनको उसका खामियाजा, इन्फ्लेशन हाई 10% से ऊपर इन्फ्लेशन, 8% से ऊपर इन्फ्लेशन उनको भुगतना पड़ रहा है, क्योंकि बहुत सारा पैसा थोड़े से सामान को चेज कर रहा है। जबकि हमारी अर्थव्यवस्था ने उस समय जब आत्मनिर्भर भारत अभियान पैकेज आया था तो बहुत आलोचक थे सरकार के भी कि साहब आप तो लोगों की बाकी देखिए, देश तो डाल रहे हैं पैसा, आप लोगों के बैंक अकाउंट में पैसा नहीं डाल रहे हैं। महिलाओं के डाला गया 500-500 रुपए, किसान सम्मान निधि एक अलग योजना है वो भी चल रही है। पर भारत सरकार ने ऐसे जनमानस को इस तरीके से पैसा ना डालने का निर्णय लिया, नोट ना छापने का निर्णय लिया। आज हम उसके अच्छे परिणाम हम सामने देख रहे हैं कि हमारा इन्फ्लेशन 7% है। और यही कारण है निखिल कि हमारी अर्थव्यवस्था, हमारी शेयर मार्केट इस समय बाकी की अर्थव्यवस्थाओं और बाकी की शेयर मार्केट से कहीं बेहतर है। अगर आप, मेरे पास आंकड़े हैं डाउ जोन्स के, नैस्डैक के, S&P के, अगर आप उनका पिछले 52 हफ्तों का चार्ट देखें और भारतीय स्टॉक मार्केट का 52 हफ्तों का चार्ट देखें, मुझे लग रहा है जो बात मैंने अभी कही है आपको वो बिल्कुल सामने स्पष्ट होती हुई दिखाई देगी। ये रेडियो का माध्यम है तो हम इसमें चार्ट तो पेश कर सकते नहीं, पर आपको स्पष्ट रूप से ये दिखाई देने लग जाएगा।
Well, let's have a look at the U.S. markets now. Dow Jones Industrial Average rose by 825 points or 2.8% to 30,316. The S&P 500 gained by 113 points or 3.1% to 3,791. And the Nasdaq Composite Index added 361 points or 3.3% at 11,176. It was the biggest one-day gain for the S&P 500 since May 2020. The Dow Jones and the S&P 500 posted the biggest two-day rallies since April 2020. A brief take on the U.S. market. I know you have linked it to the Sensex. You have compared it to what the Sensex has performed not only yesterday but from the time of the COVID period. That who is buying into the markets right now? Why the sentiment improved despite inflation high and the yields on bonds? GSEC has crossed 4%. Briefly.
Well, I think this is more speculative. It's short covering, as we call in the market's technical language, Arjun. And day before yesterday, IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva, she made a comment that inflation after all, recession after all can be avoided if the economies, they focus more on fiscal policies. They match the fiscal policies with the monetary policies. So I think that sort of changed the sentiment, and I think the market started believing that the countries, after her statement, may like to change the strategy. Although I feel that to implement that in practice, is going to be a very tough call. In many ways, Arjun, I'm making a very strong statement here, and I know I'm going to be correct on this. In many ways, I think some of the mistakes done during COVID by some of the country, let's not be specific, let's not take names,
right,
but I think some of the mistakes are irreversible. So I think which is why I am amongst the 98% experts who believe that recession is on, because Fed is quite committed to enhance the interest rates by another 75 or 50 basis points in the meetings to come. So therefore, growth is going to be impacted. If growth is impacted, recession is, it looks almost imminent at this point, Arjun. So therefore, we need to be very, very watchful of what's happening around the world and in our country, which might have a cascading and a rippling effect.
Let's see how the oil market performed. Global crude oil prices were little changed today, ahead of a meeting of OPEC plus producers to discuss the big cut in crude output after gaining more than 3% in the previous session. Brent crude oil futures was up 1 cent at $91.81 a barrel after climbing $2.9 in the previous session. U.S. crude futures fell by 9 cents to $86.43 a barrel after gaining $2.9 a day earlier. Very briefly, Sharad, inflation is linked to the recession that you mentioned about the U.S. How do you see the rising oil prices actually helping matters? In fact, it's probably worsening matters if these prices continue and supply cuts are again approved by OPEC+.
Well, reduced oil prices is good news for countries like India. There's no doubt about it, where 86% of our imports are dependent on oil is dependent on imports. But then for the reason it is falling, it's not very good. And I think OPEC got worried when the prices almost started touching below 80. OPEC got worried that their bottom lines and their top lines started slipping, so they decided to cut the production. So I think this is again a very speculative game. The moment it rises, there is certain action. The moment it falls, OPEC gets into action. So I think India is going to be a beneficiary of low oil prices. But yes, if they start shooting up, we can actually face stagflation, which means that high inflation, no growth, and I think it is going to hit our import bill, our forex reserves as well. So let's hope for the best and pray for the worst that it doesn't happen. And I think sense prevails in the international crude oil prices market also, Arjun, is what I would like to say.
जी, और भारत दुनिया में चीनी का सबसे बड़ा उत्पादक तथा दूसरा सबसे बड़ा निर्यातक बन गया है। देश में सत्र 2021-22 में 5,000 लाख मीट्रिक टन से अधिक गन्ने का रिकॉर्ड उत्पादन हुआ। इसमें से 35 लाख मीट्रिक टन चीनी को एथेनॉल उत्पादन के लिए और 359 लाख मीट्रिक टन चीनी का उत्पादन चीनी मिलों द्वारा किया गया। उपभोक्ता कार्य, खाद्य और सार्वजनिक वितरण मंत्रालय ने कहा है कि यह मौसम भारतीय चीनी क्षेत्र के लिए परिवर्तनकारी साबित हुआ है। इस सत्र में चीनी का रिकॉर्ड 109 लाख मीट्रिक टन से अधिक का निर्यात हुआ है। मंत्रालय ने यह भी कहा कि सहायक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय कीमतों और केंद्र सरकार की नीतियों से भारतीय चीनी उद्योग ने ये उपलब्धि हासिल की है। इससे लगभग 40,000 करोड़ रुपए की विदेशी मुद्रा अर्जित हुई है। शरद, इस कार्यक्रम में शामिल होने और हमसे चर्चा करने के लिए आपका शुक्रिया हम करेंगे, लेकिन उसके पहले कुछ पूछना चाहते हैं हमारे साथ में।
Yes, we still have time because the gold market internationally, Sharad, it is right now at $1,719 US per troy ounce. The bullion markets obviously are closed here, but the gold prices have gone up by almost $40 in a very short term. Why? Briefly, we are running out of time.
I think they have been showing some synchronization with the stock markets, Arjun. So when we saw the stocks recovering, the gold market recovered as well as an asset class. But I think long run, I'm very hopeful and very optimistic about the gold prices. So an investment portfolio constituting 10 to 15% of gold is recommended for all the investors in long term.
Thank you so much, Sharad, for being with us on the program Market Mantra and giving us your views, valuable views to our listeners.
और अंत में श्रोताओं, चलने से पहले सुर्खियों पर एक बार नजर फिर से। घरेलू शेयर बाजार और मुद्रा बाजार आज दशहरा पर्व के उपलक्ष्य में बंद रहे। भारत दुनिया में चीनी का सबसे बड़ा उत्पादक और दूसरा सबसे बड़ा निर्यातक बना। और वैश्विक कारोबार में एशियाई तथा अमेरिकी बाजारों में भविष्य में ब्याज दरों में कम वृद्धि की संभावनाओं के कारण बढ़त का रुख रहा।
And that's it in this edition of Market Mantra for now. Goodbye.
नमस्कार।